John is a diligent farmer who is committed to his. The family's estate had a modest and peaceful life on the farm. His tranquility one evening was cut short when a hiker who was hurt unexpectedly showed up at his home looking for John appreciated assistance motivated by kindness. The hiker brought food into his house and a place to stay overnight, but by morning, his life took a sudden turn for the worst. Vehicles that news reporters and attorneys owned, everyone was waiting for him on his property. John had no idea that his simple act of his life was going to be changed by kindness in ways he never anticipated. Forever welcome back to Unveiled, everyone. Stories. I have another one today, a touching tale to tell you after John had a long day of laboring in the fields. A farmer in his early 50s named Miller stands outside a small, dark kitchen of his. Wind howls and a storm rages across the rain and fields beating down on the windows. John stirs a pot of water on the stove. Rippling on the creamy surface of warm milk next to him, sitting quietly on the counter, is his tough, crusty bread loaf. It is sliced through by calloused hands. Attentively listening to the knife's sound, rubs up against the chopping board, almost inaudible above the storm. He positions the slices into a bowl that has been chipped, the milk heating over them while they watch the bread get softer and starts to crumble. This straightforward dinner serves as his reward for the work of the day, is a silent routine that provides a certain level of comfort, that he chooses up the spoon and is ready to swallow his initial bite when there was a loud bang at John. The door breaks through the storm. His hand hovering over the bowl freezes. Once more, the knock is louder and more urgent, reverberating through the ancient. There aren't many farmhouse guests here, particularly in this kind of weather. His forehead wrinkles as he reaches for a hanging flashlight by the door. His food yet unfinished, he moves carefully over the counter. In the direction of the creaking door, his flashlight beam was open, revealed a soaked figure on the porch. An early 30s man with unkempt hair stuck to his forehead and an expression engraved with water from exhaustion poured from his torn. Please stop the garments from gathering at his feet. The man's voice stumbled and he needed assistance. Hardly audible above the roar of the wind, John's eyes became wide as he absorbed the man's condition. Shaky, pallid skin motions and deep scratches. He crossed his arms. John immediately moved to the side and indicated, "Come in, immediately, or you'll freeze." The man limped inside, death outside. Creating a water trail across the hardwood floor, he was slumped over. His ankle was twisted and his respiration was difficult. At an unusual, John firmly ordered, "Angle, sit by the fire," directing him to a seat close to the stone. Throwing another log onto the hearth, he encouraged the flames to rise higher. Their warmth swiftly permeated the space. The man sighed and slumped into the chair, his trembling hands stretched with relief. "Towards the thank you fire," he said in a hoarse voice. And raspy John picked up a ragged cloth from a hook close by and gave it to. He said, "Here, dry yourself off," in a tone mild but stable, while the man wiped his face and arms. John's keen eyes never missed an item that is torn, bruised and scratched. "What's the fabric sticking to his body? Happened to you?" he inquired in a quiet voice. But the man winced with worry. His motions were rigid as he worked. The eye was trekking, and he had a towel over his arms. Started haltingly, his sentences punctuated by deep as the trail wound into the forest. Breaths. The storm wouldn't catch this, I thought. I twisted my body after slipping on some pebbles. Ankle. And he continued to walk away, gazing at the, honestly, I didn't believe I would make it to the floor. John was crouching by the cabinet when it came out, removing a homemade salve tin and, after shooting the man, a roll of bandages. Comforting look as he stood up. "The important thing is that you're here now." Since John meticulously cleaned, the man recoiled at the sight of the wounds. Sting of the salve, but said nothing. His thankfulness was evident in his exhausted water. "You're fortunate that it's nothing," logged eyes. Even worse, John said his hands were steady as he covered the enlarged ankle with taking care of this should hold for the time being. However, avoid it as much as possible. The man nodded softly and sincere. "I'm not even sure how to express my gratitude. You didn't need to assist me, yet you did." John dismissively shake his head, a slight grin tugging at the side of his mouth. "How would I behave as a man? Let's get you something warm now, didn't we?" John went back into the kitchen to eat. kitchen and took a quick look at the bread bowl, as well as milk he had made for himself. It was a straightforward dinner that he frequently used. Following arduous, back-breaking workdays, his stomach gave a loud, biting grumble, reminding him that he hadn't had any food since breakfast, a quick bread slice and a coffee before leaving to take care of. He stopped for a bit at the property. His hunger was pulling him down. However, the picture showed the hiker drenched and he was shivering from the fire. Ideas, without giving them any further attention. It wasn't much, but he picked up the bowl. It was sufficient to provide warmth, and holding it to provide solace to someone in need. John positioned the bowl in the living room, delicately on the table before the "Here, hiker," he replied quietly. "It won't do much, but it will warm you up." The man glanced at John after glancing at the bowl. "Would you mind eating me already?" John slipped the lie out, "As you obviously need this," just like his smile. The man hesitated more than I do, although eventually the bowl was taken up and his first few chews came gradually. Hands shaking, revealing how frail he was, slowly warmed by the warmth of the food, started to restore color to John's cheeks, while the man ate quietly, sank into a chair next to the fire. A pile of old, tattered documents lying. The man on his lap looked up between bites and saw John's intense gaze. He scowled at one of the pages. "The flickering fire deeply worries me." Bold, brightly lit writing at the top of the document. Observe that the remainder of the page was about foreclosure, partially concealed behind John's hand. Although his expression's stress spoke volumes, after a brief bit of hesitation, the man said gently. He nodded. "Everything is fine." His tone was cautious as he spoke toward the papers. Wishing to Jayan looked up, taken off guard by the overstep, and then exhaled a weary sigh, just a little farmder. His tone was measured, as though he didn't want to elaborate. "You don't need to be concerned about." The man's nodded perception. John's voice carries weight, but deciding, "I hope everything works, but don't push too hard." He looked out with sincerity. Remaining on the farmer's tired expression, John was able to make a small smile. The papers are folded and placed on. He stroked the little table beside him. His temples, as though to relieve the strain of the day. The silence was broken. "What's?" the hiker answered. "Your name is Andrew." His spoon is lowered. "And you?" John the farmer responded by merely reclining back. His chair, they had a casual talk. However, the storm's weight and the John's expression was laced with quiet strain. The room after Andrew's supper, he looked out the window, where the rain was still falling, smashed into the wind, and the glass howled as a warning. "Thus I should definitely, when the storm passes, Andrew, go outside," stated reluctantly. John, "Don't even consider it," forcefully responded. "You're not in a position to tonight go anyplace. Remain here and grab some rest, Andrew. You can depart in the morning." Looked at him doubtfully, wondering if unwilling to impose. John dismissed his worries by waving. Avoiding forcing a restful night's sleep is the "don't bother about the least amount of." Reluctantly, rest. Andrew acknowledged the fire's warmth and John's hospitality's comfort, starting to calm his tense nerves once the dishes were cleared. John picked up a heavy covering from a neighboring tree and gave it to Andrew, who said, "You'll take my bed." He said, "Tonight," in a tone that left there is space for debate, "but I'll sleep outside." Andrew objected, saying, "I can't let you do that. John, you've already accomplished a lot. I insist that it's not up," and I hand silence him. For discussion, with no option but to give in, John led Andrew to a little bedroom. The little bed in the rear of the house had a patchwork quilt covering it that appeared handcrafted with vivid hues. Significant contrast to the deteriorated walls of the "go to your room and rest," John replied, stepping return to the door, "where we'll continue our conversation." In the morning, John went back to and lay out on the living room's worn couch. The outside storm started to, despite being damaged, abate. The farmhouse held steady against the wind and rain. Inside the flickering firelight at night, long shadows were produced on the walls, providing a brief feeling of warmth, and the two strangers' safety brought in the guest room. Together by the storm, Andrew was also awake, but he was unable to shake the generosity of the farmer or the view among those records from his thoughts. The bed, the clean bandages, and the delicious supper was much more than what he had anticipated, particularly from someone who so obviously with little resources. He decided to locate a means to return the man's kindness, but he was clueless as to how, by morning, with the storm gone. There was a slight sound of Andrew was awakened from his slumber by hammering. He blinked in the direction of the early sunlight. Passing via the tiny aperture of his body was still heavy in the guest room from the shuffle of fatigue from the day before he saw John close to the window. Barn fixing a damaged wooden gate using methodical accuracy, the gold long shadows cast by morning light showcasing John's weathered physique as he worked on putting on his jacket. Andrew strolled outside into the cool breeze. Against his face, he took a long breath. Enjoying the farm's peaceful stillness as he approached John, he was unable to but have a slight sense of regret for all he had received refuge and comfort. John obviously didn't have much to spare. In the morning, Andrew raised his voice. Breaking the silence, John stopped in the middle of swinging the hammer. He wiped his forehead on the ground, using the vaguely positive smile on the back of his hand. "I hope you had a good night's sleep." "Thank you." Andrew spoke to you, his tone tinted with gratitude. I was about to express my appreciation and head out. He indicated the feeling the main road's direction pang of parting. John gave a nod but held up a hold on. His tone was warm yet determined. "Hold on, don't leave just yet. I have for your curiosity." Andrew watched John vanish into the barn on the left. By himself, his eyes strayed to the far. He took a few steps off the edge of the land, toward the property's perimeter, which is when a notice board caught his attention. Partially hidden by weeds that have overgrown the name of A, was shown in bold characters. Reputable company with a name that had the reputation of consuming tiny farms underneath it, with smaller text suggested a warning, or something sinister. That didn't require a thorough reading to be comprehended. The sign loomed like a silent danger, looming large above the serene dawn with a pang of Andrew looked back with uneasiness, till he saw a farm close to the barn. Buckets that are set up to collect rainwater with their spouts repaired. Using tape and metal scraps, why would a homemade system speak so loudly? A farm this size is largely dependent on. He followed the gutters with rainwater, observing their patched and tattered state as he made his way toward the fields. He noticed another detail, and the bottom of the irrigation channel is cracked, and it was deserted and barren, as though it hadn't having not seen water in years. Andrew knelt to feel the coarseness of the soil when you touch it disintegrate under his brittle texture. He straightened his fingers and looked back, moving in the direction of the house, his mind racing. The parts came together in a large, the overhanging influence of a company above a farmer, dry fields dependent on rainfall that once flourished, every indication that someone fighting against powers that are far more. There Andrew's chest constricted as he understood how much John was putting up with. The farm's silence was cut short by the gentle crunch of. He turned to see footsteps in the ground. "John is coming with a burlap sack." John remarked this while grinning and passing the bag with a small item for the fresh produce and some fruit on the way. "It's not much from the farm, but it's the." Andrew took the bag. "Which is the least I can do." His speech was warm with appreciation for what you've done, more than enough to allow me to stay here and aid me by providing a warm dinner. With my wounds, I'm not sure how to pay you back. John shrugged. "Don't worry. Regarding repayment, simply return home." Safe. Andrew paused his hold. Securing the bag, "John, I have a question for you before I leave." His interest flickered in as he tilted his head, his eyes sure. Andrew's gesture was obvious. "I saw that you're heading toward the rain barrels. Is gathering rainwater solely for backup?" Or John's face appeared in shadow. "And he not just backup a while ago." I sighed. "The water was purchased by Evergreen Corporation. Rights in this region, they established a system to take water out of the river and leave little for the nearby farmers. They provided their services to me, of course, but at a price that would further imprison me in debt. Thus I rely on rainfall." And Andrew nodded. "What little can I salvage?" Slowly, the land and his rushing thoughts. "Does it belong to you?" John's jaw tensed, and he gazed out across the fields. His expressiveness is now difficult to read. "However, they have been pursuing it for years. Evergreen is interested in purchasing it, and when I refused, despite their best efforts to push me away from zoning conflicts, lawmakers made untrue statements regarding environmental infractions, even attempted to buy out my neighbors in order to keep me alone. paused, speaking in a firm but somewhat. "This property has been in my fatigue family for generations. I will never give it up." Andrew took in everything they threw at me. His remarks while turning back to look at the far-off signboards. "I'm not sure what that would be like enduring all of that." JN shrugged and softened his face with a small smile. "Attributes that make this location more than just a my history is giving up on the farm, which is my home, is not an option." Andrew paused for a second. "Prior to speaking again, those documents you were, they discussing the farm last night?" John's eyebrows raised in mild astonishment at the "indeed." "There are a few legal notifications, and you should not be concerned about debt allegations. I am aware that we recently met." Andrew started gently. "But if it's okay with you, could I look? I've had to cope with a reasonable amount of legal documents and contracts. Perhaps I can assist." John starred in my time. Looked him with a mixture of appreciation and doubt. "That's a generous offer," he said, crossing his face. "However, I don't want to bother you with," Andrew replied. "My problems are not a burden. Forcefully, if there's even a remote possibility that can assist, I'd like to attempt studying." John, for a second, then gently nodded. Everyone, "Yes, I'll introduce them as John," vanished into the house to retrieve the documents. Andrew was standing close to the barns. His thoughts were whirling with potential things he didn't doubt if he could actually assist. But the concept of abandoning John to fight this war by himself wasn't comfortable with him until John brought back a little pile of papers. Andrew cautiously took them in. His eyes shone with resolve. "I appreciate your faith in me," he said. "Really, I'll see what I can accomplish with a—" Andrew vanished down the last wave. Carry the fresh vegetable sack in his grasp, and a choice beginning to take shape in his mind. John remained there for a little while longer. He sighed as he looked at the deserted road. He shook his head sharply as though to clarify the residual uncertainties without another word. He returned to the barn to pick, lifting the hammer he had previously placed down. As the sound of wood being driven by nails, John's ideas reverberated across the farm. He tried to concentrate on his work while drifting. However, Andrew's final remarks persisted in, could a stranger truly help his mind? Could he really afford to wash his teeth? John's jaw dropped from the concept and pounded more forcefully as though the movement could block out the doubt that is tearing at him. Work needed to be done for the time being, and that was all he was able to control the hours that passed without anyone noticing. John, the sun is rising higher in the sky, switched between tasks tending to the storm's obstinate repairs. He wiped the perspiration from he said to himself, crack, loose hinges and boards. It wasn't until a loose board was being hammered by him on the barn door that sounds like it's about to engines penetrated his mind, and he held the hammer tightly as he froze. A dark automobile went down the gravel road. First showed up on its glossy surface, reflecting the sunlight from the afternoon behind two police cruisers arrived with their lights on. Distinct but distinctive van with the logo of the news station came in second. Why in the world did John mutter? A chill passed through him as he put down his hammer. Through him when the convoy arrived, kicking, creating a dust cloud on his driveway. As he cleaned his hands, his heart raced, put on his jeans and moved to the front. Andrew was the first to hesitantly step, leaving the news vehicle, now wearing a stylish outfit that nearly he was quiet yet serious, unidentifiable. Manner suggested a feeling of direction. Two from the svelte black vehicle behind him, attorneys appeared, each with a polished briefcase. Their faces were intent and professionally. A few moments later, the police officers got out of their cruisers and began scanning the region with silent authority. Their presence, adding a distinct sense of John's breath, adds a somber element to the picture. He squeezed his fists in discomfort. What's happening here is creeping up his spine. He raised his voice sharply, asking, "Why are the police officers here?" And reporters Andrew came up to with slow movements, lifting his hands in a gesture of confirmation. "John, I'm aware of this seems like a lot, but I need your confidence. I owe you an justification." John's gaze flicked between the reporters and the cops, his nervousness. "You'd better explain quickly," he replied. With a strong voice, Andrew halted several feet away, his voice firm yet steady. As an investigative reporter, I have been attempting to expose corporate malfeasance targeting John's jaw." A little farmer stiffened his ego and fatigue. Battling for control, I didn't seek assistance from him. He whispered softly, "I know you didn't. Andrew's voice grew softer as he spoke. "Yet the battle is greater than just you. You cannot defeat it by yourself." He pointed to these attorneys. "The group behind him has come to review your materials with the reporters. Their purpose is to ensure that your story escapes, and the police arrive to make sure the company doesn't take revenge or attempt to suddenly." John's eyes shifted to the group. The attorneys were prepared to professional expressions, but the reporters repositioned microphones and cams, whispering to one another. The police officers continued to keep an eye on their existence, disturbing. "So why should I trust any of John?" John inquired. After a brief pause in his, with a doubtful tone, Andrew stepped. His gaze met John's more closely. "Because I have devoted years to discovering tales such as yours. And since the sole reason that I'm standing here at this moment is that you provided, you didn't have to provide me refuge. If you'll allow the attorneys to examine, we can get the truth from those documents." John wavered, his intuition divided between distrust and, at last, a glimmer of hope. A few moments later, he turned to face the home. He came back holding a pile of papers. As he handed, his hands shook a little. Them to a lawyer, the attorney leafed over the papers with a keen. The next minutes felt precise. Hours. As John saw the tension the lawyer eventually coils in his chest, examined his grim countenance, but the lawyer, Mr. Miller, started his tone that is professional and forceful. "We've examined your contracts in light of the information we discovered the company you're working with, who has been involved in dishonest methods they've employed, such as fake fees and used debt manipulation to target your." John's breath caught in your throat, property claiming that they had been lying for a long time. The attorney acknowledged that they had been taking use of gaps to exert pressure on tiny farmers such as yourself into sacrificing their land. "But now that this proof is available, we can take action and submit an injunction to cease their activities right away." The reporters started questioning John. Every moment was filmed by their cameras. "How much time have you spent on this?" One of them paused, his voice before asking JN. Shivering a little, it's been months since he acknowledged that notices had been sent, increasing costs and threatening to. "I didn't know what to do with everything I had. Did I really think I would have to let go of Andrew?" Put a comforting hand on John's shoulder. "You're no longer by yourself. The public release of the story, and they won't be no longer able to conceal their behavior." As the policeman proceeded to ensure the region to make sure that no representatives of the company could impede the attorneys. Explanation of our next course of action will be to file a lawsuit against the company because of their unlawful activities. You'll also be reimbursed for the harm you've stated the day after enduring one of them. As it happened, there was a lot of activity. Attorneys moved swiftly to submit the required records, that the reporters had an interview with John and recorded the state of his farm, and the law enforcement made certain John's property stayed safe. By evening, news of the unethical actions of the corporation had started to circulate, igniting anger and demands responsibility. In the coming weeks that came after the court case was over, to John's advantage, the company was instructed to refund and cancel any debts, any confiscated property. They will also be penalized for their deceptive activities, and a portion of the agreement was given to John as restitution, along with John's newly discovered stability allowed him to invest in fixing the machinery on his property and growing his business on his land, once in danger of disappearing, turned into a flourishing months that represent resilience. The farmhouse, previously a representation of isolation, had turned into a meeting spot. For the neighborhood, the formerly barren fields now thrived, yielding a profusion of fresh food that the farmers have joined together by their mutual hardship, had produced a flourishing cooperative, making certain the long-term viability of their means of subsistence. One night, as John watched the sun set while standing on his porch, he reflected over the horizon, recalling the stormy evening that transformed his life. He recalled the loneliness and the terror, and a stranger's surprising appearance. He recalled the generosity he had displayed. "I didn't anticipate it having such a profound hit." A flood of appreciation swept across. He understood that by assisting Andrew, in addition to saving his own farm, he had started a movement as well that would help the community as a whole. Discovered that even in the most dire of despite storms there is always hope, and that even the tiniest deeds of compassion could possess the most profound and enduring impact. I appreciate you viewing this story touched you. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to help spread the motivation. And before you leave, have a look. There are a lot of videos on your screen. With more touching tales that you'll enjoy it, so click immediately and save the flowing kindness.